I drove 9 hours through a storm, holding my daughter's favorite carrot cake in my lap. 9 hours, and the first thing I hear when I get there? Her voice, muffled behind a wall, saying, God, I hope she crashes. My name's Eleanor. I'm a mom. And for the first time in my life, I didn't walk toward the pain. I walked away. Have you ever had a moment where staying silent said more than anything you could ever scream? Tell me, what would you have done if your own child said something like that about you? New Haven in November was just gray. The sky hung low, everything felt damp. The wedding venue looked like a Pinterest dream. Fairy lights wrapped around wooden beams, flower arrangements already drooping from the drizzle. My shoes made that squelching sound as I stepped onto the gravel. I pulled my cardigan tight. The cake was starting to slide in its box. Then I saw Courtney. She was across the courtyard in this ivory satin dress, smiling like someone told her to. She waved, but late, like she'd forgotten. Oh, you made it, she said, like it honestly surprised her. She didn't even look at the cake. Some guy I didn't know came and took it without a word, disappeared through the kitchen doors, and just like that, my hands were empty. I followed the quiet sound of guests chatting, past the candles, past people holding up phones for selfies. Somewhere near the back, over the hum of a generator, I heard her again. God, I hope she crashes. It'd solve so much. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even emotional. Just casual, like she was talking about the weather. Then came Nathan's laugh, low, like he got the joke. I didn't move. My fingers curled up tight in my palms, my nails dug into my skin, and my heart, it didn't shatter. That would have taken more effort. It just folded, quietly. Outside, the rain picked up again. I don't even remember walking out there. My shoes slipped on the wet hay. The cold went straight through my sleeves, but I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I didn't even cry. I just walked to my car, opened the door, sat down. I wiped the fog off the rearview mirror with my sleeve, looked at my own eyes. They didn't even move. My mom used to say, "Some moments you don't come back from." I think this was one of mine. I turned the key. The engine groaned, but I didn't go home. I just drove. Past exits I could name in my sleep, past towns I could have stopped in, called someone, past that little voice in my head begging to explain. About an hour later, I saw a motel sign flash, vacancy. It was tucked beside the highway. The office light was flickering, like it couldn't decide if it was still alive. I pulled in. The engine ticked. The air smelled like old rain and forgetting. The guy at the front desk didn't ask why I was there. He just handed me a key. Room 5. The bedspread was stiff and covered in some floral pattern. The heater rattled in the corner. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the rain turn into sleet. On the nightstand there was a takeout menu, laminated and curling at the corners. I didn't open it. Instead, I just whispered into the room, "You always bring too much, Mom." Courtney said that once. She was laughing, trying to balance a tray of deviled eggs at Easter. Back then I thought she meant I was generous. But now? Now I wondered if she meant I was just too much, too present, too inconvenient. Outside, the neon sign blinked again, then stayed on. I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I let the silence speak for me. The motel walls were thin enough to hear everything. Someone laughing at the TV, a toilet flushing, the quiet hum of someone else's loneliness. Room 7 smelled like bleach and old coffee. The towel hanging on the cracked tile rack wasn't really a towel, more like a suggestion of one. But I wasn't there for comfort. I just wanted to disappear. Somewhere no one knew my name or what it meant to them. The boy at the front desk gave me the key without even looking up from his phone. He was polite in that way strangers are when they assume your pain isn't their business. And honestly, I was grateful for that. I sat cross-legged on this scratchy bedspread covered in some faded floral pattern, holding a bag of peanut M&Ms from the vending machine out front. The colors rubbed off on my palm: red, blue, yellow, childhood colors. I opened my messages and typed, "I'm okay." Marge probably would have believed it, or at least pretended to. I stared at those words for a while, then I deleted them. The heater kicked on with a loud clank. I leaned back and let the sound fill the silence, closing my eyes. Everything behind them felt heavy. Harold died in early spring 2011. I still remember the phone ringing, sharp and long, and the voice of the bank manager 2 weeks later, gently asking if I needed help getting into the accounts. I didn't. Harold had made sure I'd know what to do. What I wasn't ready for was how fast Courtney and Nathan stepped into the space he left behind. First, Courtney needed help covering rent in grad school. Then Nathan lost his job at that startup. A few thousand here, a co-signed card there. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I mean, what kind of mother says no? But temporary stretched and stretched until it snapped. So many little yeses. Yes, I'll sign the loan paperwork. Yes, I'll cover the deposit for the new place in Stamford. Yes, of course you can use the cabin for the honeymoon. Each one felt small, reasonable, just one more step. I used to laugh at Nathan's jokes at dinner parties, even the ones that stung. "Your mom's like a trust fund with a heartbeat," he'd say, swirling his wine. And I'd smile because what else was I supposed to do? Ruin the dinner? It never felt like I was giving up. It felt like surviving, until last night. Now I was standing under a buzzing ceiling light in this motel room I paid for in cash, staring into a mirror so old it couldn't remember how to reflect properly. My hair was a mess from the rain, my lipstick had vanished, and there was a bit of frosting still clinging to my collar. "You weren't helping," I whispered. The sound of my voice startled me. "You were disappearing." I waited for the denial to kick in. It didn't. My phone buzzed. I didn't rush. I walked over slowly, like maybe if I moved too fast the message would vanish. "Courtney, where did you go?" Then another one. "Courtney, the cake was dry anyway." I looked at the screen. No anger, no heartbreak, just this sharp clarity like something inside me finally landed. I closed the phone, switched off the lamp. Outside, the neon vacancy sign blinked twice, then stayed steady. I lay back on the bed and let the heater hum while everything in my mind finally started to clear. The rain was still falling, just softer now. It tapped gently against the window of room 7, like it was tired too. I sat at this small wooden desk with warped corners and old cigarette burns. There was a Motel notepad next to me, blank except for the faded logo. I opened my banking app, hoping for some kind of comfort. Maybe just something to prove I hadn't been completely naive. But the numbers on the screen didn't make sense. Balances I didn't recognize, charges I couldn't explain. Courtney and Nathan's house in Stamford. My name was on it. I was listed as the guarantor. I'd never even been inside. I kept scrolling. There was more. 6 credit lines, all active, 3 maxed out, 1 with a late fee. I just stared. Last time I checked, I had 0 debt. Now everything was red. My credit usage? Over 70%. And then I remembered something Harold said years ago when we refinanced the house. He was reading over the paperwork, line by line, calm and careful. "Ellie," he said, "one day you're going to have to say no, not just think it." Back then, I thought I still had time. I called the bank. The hold music was way too cheerful for what it was. When someone finally picked up, the voice on the other end was all sunshine. "Thank you for calling, Mrs. Wade. How can I help you today?" I gave her the list, every account, one by one. She stayed cheerful. "Oh, yes, you're the primary guarantor on all of those. Is there an issue?" That word, primary. It landed hard. I wasn't just a co-signer. I was the safety net, the backup plan, the idiot. "No," I said quietly. "Just confirming." I hung up before she could ask if I needed anything else. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Marge. "Hey, honey." Her voice came through soft and steady like a porch light left on. Just checking in. You okay? You haven't sounded like yourself lately. Call me when you can." I smiled a little. Marge always knew how to check on me without digging. She always knew how far to lean in. Then another buzz. A text from Courtney. "Where are you? You left a mess in the kitchen. Nathan says your room's been paid for, just so you know." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "I'm fine." Deleted it. Then I typed, "You lied to me." Deleted that too. Instead, I looked across the room at the mirror. Same face staring back, but something in the eyes had shifted. "I'm not crazy," I said out loud. The motel room caught the words and held them there. "They used me." And just like that, there it was, the truth I'd been dancing around. I sat back down, picked up the notepad, started writing down what I remembered, account numbers, interest rates, even that old P.O. box Harold used for his side business, folded the paper once, then again, slipped it into the side pocket of my bag. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The neon vacancy sign was still buzzing, blinking slow and steady. I whispered to myself, not a question, more like a quiet decision. Time to call Deborah. Deborah, Harold's old attorney, the only person I knew who never mistook kindness for weakness. She liked her coffee strong and her voice stronger. I wasn't looking for revenge, not yet. I just wanted the truth, clean, clear, and mine. I picked up the phone, let it rest in my hand. I wasn't dialing yet, but I was ready. The brick building sat quietly behind a few tall evergreens, its ivy-covered walls softening the sharp bite of December. Deborah's office had always looked more like a library than a law firm. Frosted glass on the door, a small brass plate that read, "Estate and Trusts. Deborah L. Ames, Esquire." I sat across from her, the soft glow of a desk lamp turning the whole room a warm amber. She rested her hands on a folder and looked me straight in the eye. "Are you ready," she asked, "to be the villain in their story?" I didn't even pause. "Yes." She smiled, not out of pity, but like she understood, like she'd been where I was, even if she never said so. I used to think setting boundaries meant being cruel, that it pushed people away. But that was before I realized kindness had become the leash they used to keep me quiet. Deborah opened the folder and spread out the documents. My living trust, financial guarantees, healthcare proxy, all the places where Courtney and Nathan's names used to be, right beside mine. "I want them off," I told her. "All of it?" she asked. I nodded. "And the will?" She flipped to the last page. "Leave one thing," I said. "The recipe box. Tape a note to it." She paused, pen in hand. "What should the note say?" I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. "Just this. You asked for everything. This is what I kept. We went through it all. The formalities, the legal wording, the signatures. But with every stroke of the pen, I felt something shift. I wasn't cutting them out. I was setting myself free." Courtney's voice popped into my head, uninvited. A memory from a few years ago, when I turned off my phone during a quilting retreat. "You don't abandon people, Mom," she had said. "That's not who you are." I carried guilt for days, and now I saw the irony clear as day. Deborah handed me the final documents. "Do you want them to know now or after?" I looked down at the fresh ink next to my name. "Let them feel it," I said. "Let silence come first, then the explanation." She just nodded. "I'll file everything today. You can always change it later, but honestly," she gave me this little shrug, "you won't need to." The recipe box was already in my car. Harold made it by hand during his woodworking phase. Walnut, dovetail joints. Courtney always loved the cinnamon roll recipe hidden at the bottom. I left it in there with my handwriting in faded blue ink. Before I stood up, I ran my finger across the last page of the will. "I finally did something just for me," I said. Deborah stood with me. "That's the trick, Eleanor. Peace feels selfish at first, but it's not. It's yours." Outside, the air was sharp and cold on my cheeks. I didn't rush. I let the wind take whatever it was I'd been carrying for too long. The car was warm when I got in. I sat there for a minute, letting the heater kick on, letting the quiet settle around me like a quilt I'd finally earned. Then my phone buzzed. Courtney. Are you still coming for Christmas? Nathan says we need to talk. No. Hi. No, I'm sorry, just more need. Still assuming I'd come running. I stared at the message, then flipped the phone face down on the passenger seat. Let them wait. Let the silence grow. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to disappoint them. The roast chicken was crackling softly in the oven, filling the kitchen with this buttery, herby warmth. I stood there, ladling cinnamon spice cider into a chipped old mug, the kind Harold used to call sturdy as truth. On the table, just two place settings, one for me, one for no one. Mr. Darcy, my tabby with the personality of royalty, sat on the windowsill, flicking his tail like he was silently judging the chicken from a distance. I used to cook for 20. Full tables, casseroles in every corner, cookies stacked like little towers, cranberry sauce in fancy old glass dishes. People used to laugh, spill wine, complain about the heat or the gravy or each other. Back then I thought it was love. Looking back, it felt more like performance. This year there was no crowd, no applause. I played old Christmas jazz on vinyl, records Harold boxed up before the stroke. The static between the songs reminded me, even silence isn't really empty. Courtney's first text came at 9:07 a.m. Hope you're well. We're opening gifts at noon. Then, hours later, please confirm if you're coming to dinner. Nathan says RSVP matters for catering. No Merry Christmas. No we miss you. Just logistics. I didn't answer. By late afternoon, Marge showed up at the back door. Her cheeks were red from the cold. She had a bottle of wine in one arm and a little gift-wrapped puzzle in the other. Thought you could use a challenge that doesn't talk back, she said, grinning. I let her in. Poured us both a mug of cider. We talked for 20 minutes, mostly about her son's divorce and some weird smell in her garage. She didn't ask about Courtney. She just sat with me. Let the silence be what it was, honest. After she left, I fed Mr. Darcy a piece of chicken thigh. He sniffed it, turned away, and went back to his perch like a furry little sentinel of solitude. I lit one beeswax candle, just one. The flame flickered gently, like it had something kind to say. I thought about that Christmas I had pneumonia, how Courtney once called it the best one ever, so peaceful. I used to think that was a joke. Now I'm not so sure. I looked at the empty chairs, not with sadness, just acknowledgement. For years I filled those seats like lifeboats, tried to bake my way into being needed. Now I was simply here, eating, breathing, choosing. I picked up my phone, scrolled to my favorites. Courtney's name was still there at the top, just out of habit. I tapped edit, then remove. My hand didn't even tremble. The chicken was perfect, crispy skin, golden brown, rosemary scent drifting through the room. I ate slowly, in peace. Each bite felt like a quiet truth. I don't need anyone's permission to feel okay. Outside, snow started falling, not heavy, just enough to make the world feel soft, still. The next day, December 26th, the letter came, certified mail, thick envelope, the kind you don't want to open before finishing your tea. Sender, Nathan Wright. Subject, property dispute and prenatal considerations. I held it in both hands, feeling its weight. Mr. Darcy brushed past my leg, then disappeared behind the couch. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I refilled my mug, flipped the record, and let the needle drop. The music crackled to life, soft and steady. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I was finally starting to hear myself think. The wind cut across the porch like it had something to prove. I'd left my tea sitting on the little wicker table. The steam was long gone. The peppermint bark beside it hadn't been touched. Mr. Darcy was curled up by the door, one eye open, tail twitching, clearly annoyed by the cold but too proud to move. Then Nathan showed up. No warning, no text, no call, just the sound of his footsteps on my porch, walking like he owned the place. He didn't even say hello. "Courtney's pregnant," he said, rubbing his hands together like he expected applause. "It's risky. Her stress levels are high." I didn't say a word, just looked at him. He was wearing a coat way too thin for the weather, but arrogance'll keep a man warm. "We're trying to rebuild bridges here, Eleanor," he said, laying it on thick. "You disappearing like that, it threw Courtney. And now, with the baby, well, family stability matters more than ever." He glanced at my tea, then at the peppermint bark. "Still doing things your way, huh?" I pushed the plate toward him. "Take a piece. It's the only thing I'm offering." He didn't, just let out a sigh and looked past me into the living room, where the tree was still blinking softly. "You know," he said, trying a softer tone, "this baby could be what brings us back together." I gave him a small smile, the kind you give a man who just tried to sell you a child like a holiday coupon. "That's a nice idea," I said, "but I've learned something. Peace built on guilt doesn't last." He blinked. You could almost see him reshuffling his strategy like a bad hand of cards. Then his phone lit up. Courtney. He answered fast and put her on speaker. "Hi, Mom." Her voice came through all syrupy, with just enough tremble to sound sincere. "I know things have been weird, but maybe we can talk. Just the two of us. I don't want tension. I just want peace." There it was again. That word. Like peace was something I'd stolen from them. I leaned forward a little. "Peace," I said, slow and steady, "isn't something you're given. It's something you earn." Silence. Nathan hung up without saying a word. Thumb hit the screen harder than it needed to. I got up, went inside for a moment, came back out with an envelope. "If this child ever needs me," I said, holding it out, "I'll be there. No conditions. But I'm not funding your fantasy, and I'm not trading my self-respect just to stay close." He didn't take it right away, and when he finally did, he held it like it might burn him. "This isn't about money," he said. The lie just hung there between us. I nodded. "Then you'll be fine." He walked down the steps without saying goodbye. No thanks, just the crunch of his shoes on gravel. The wind chased him off the porch like it was done with him too. I stood there for a moment longer, then looked at Mr. Darcy. He stretched, gave a half yawn, and looked at me like the whole thing had been beneath him. "I think that's the last time I'll see him," I said softly. The cat blinked once, unimpressed, and curled back up. Inside, the tea had gone cold. But the silence? It felt clean. Like truth. Like winter air that finally stopped hurting. The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter, catching the morning light like it thought it was something special. Ivory, gold trim, thick cardstock, Courtney's favorite kind of sincerity, flashy, expensive, and all for show. I didn't open it right away. I poured myself some tea, let the kettle whistle longer than it needed to, turned up the classical station. Something slow, lots of strings. When I finally did open it, there was this strong smell of fake rose water. The handwriting wasn't Courtney's, it was Heather's, but the tone, that was all Courtney. It started with, "Dear Mom," a page and a half dressed up in sweetness and carefully worded guilt. She talked about the baby, how stress affects pregnancy, how family should matter more than pride. Said I'd distanced myself at a vulnerable time, but there was no apology, just carefully crafted persuasion. She used the word reconsider 3 times. Not once did she say sorry. I read it twice, folded it, slid it under my tea mug, letting the steam blur the edges. I didn't need to respond. That letter wasn't meant to hear me. It was meant to sway me. That night, around 8, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, then changed my mind and picked up on the second ring. Heather's name lit up on the screen. "Hi, Eleanor. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice was low, cautious. I hadn't heard it in almost a year, not since she and Courtney fought over that rehearsal dinner guest list. "You're not," I said. "What's going on?" She paused. "I wanted you to know. Courtney wrote that letter. She asked me to copy it in my handwriting, said it would soften the edges. I was supposed to make it sound warmer." I didn't say anything, just let her talk. "But I couldn't keep doing it," she said. "It didn't feel right. You deserved better, Eleanor." Her words wrapped around me like a warm shawl. "She said you'd fold if it looked like it came from me," Heather added. Her voice wavered. She called it old lady drama. And there it was. The truth, not shouted, not dragged out in some big argument, just spoken, plain and clear. Two women finally realizing they'd both been written into the same tired story one too many times. Heather sent me the voicemail. Courtney's voice came through sharp and brittle. "If she doesn't come around, fine. Let her be the tragic matriarch sipping tea with her cat. She'll crack once the baby comes. Watch." I didn't even blink, just looked out the window. The frost was settling on the garden fence, and the sky had that old pewter look to it. "Thank you, Heather," I said after a long pause. "I'm sorry it took this long for both of us to step out of that story." She let out a breath, and I could hear something in it. Maybe it was relief. "You're not alone, Eleanor," she said. "You never were. You were just quiet." After we hung up, I pulled the letter out from under my mug. The edges were smudged now, like even the paper wasn't sure what it wanted to be. I tore it in half, one clean rip down the middle, dropped it into the fireplace. The flame caught fast, curling the gold trim like ribbon. Mr. Darcy shifted on the rug, stretched, and looked up at me like he'd been waiting for this moment all along, like he was saying, "Finally." The rain had this rhythm that afternoon, steady, unhurried. It tapped on the windows like someone too polite to knock. I'd just come in from stacking firewood. My gloves were damp, and the smell of wet cedar still clung to my sleeves. The house was quiet, curtains drawn, kettle warm, but untouched. I liked it that way now. Quiet didn't mean lonely anymore. It meant chosen. My phone buzzed on the counter. A voicemail. From Courtney. I didn't rush to listen. Instead, I fed Mr. Darcy, who gave me his usual look of royal indifference. Then I lit the fire. The room filled with that comforting scent, smoke and old wood, like the house itself was breathing out. Only then did I press play. "Hey, Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. I know all this has been confusing. And the baby, well, she's coming soon. We're just trying to keep everything calm, you know." Her voice was soft, syrupy, like she'd borrowed it from a movie. She talked about Christmas, said the roast chicken looked cute in the photo Marge posted. Cute, like my holiday was a Pinterest project, not a choice. Then she said, "I guess I just miss the way you used to fix everything. Remember when you'd bake carrot cake when I had a bad day? That was your thing, fixing things." There it was, the reach, nostalgia, layered thick over everything she didn't want to say out loud. She paused, like I could interrupt a voicemail. "Anyway, just think about what really matters, okay? Family, forgiveness. No apology, just memories, polished up and handed back like currency." I stared at the stove until the little blue flame split into two. Then I pressed delete, not out of anger, just because it didn't belong here anymore. Right then, the doorbell rang. Marge was standing there in her raincoat, half unzipped, holding a grocery bag. "Brought you something," she said, shaking off the drizzle like a dog. "It's not food, so don't panic." She handed me a jigsaw puzzle, Monet's water lilies. "Thought you could use a challenge that doesn't talk back." I smiled. "Perfect. Quiet and a little blurry. Just my speed." She didn't stay long, just enough to warm her fingers, let Mr. Darcy sniff her shoes, and then she was gone again, swallowed up by the gray outside, I spread the puzzle out on the table. Edges first, always edges. The frame before the softness, and somewhere between the third and fourth corner, I set it. Maybe to the room, maybe to myself, maybe even to her. I won't leave the door open anymore, but I'll keep a light on. It wasn't an olive branch, and it wasn't giving in. It was a boundary, and it was mine. The sun was playing tricks that afternoon. It kept slipping behind clouds just long enough to make me question the forecast. Still, the string lights swayed gently over the backyard, blinking like they had somewhere better to be. I had on my thickest cardigan, one I knitted years ago, though I couldn't quite remember when or for whom. I carried the carrot cake outside, resting on this old ceramic platter with a chip shaped like Florida. Somehow that felt just right. Marge showed up first, arms full of pasta salad and loud, familiar laughter. "I brought too much," she said. "You always do," I smiled. "That's why I keep inviting you." Then came Deborah, holding a bottle of wine in a small brown envelope. Heather brought peach cobbler and a playlist of '70s soul queued up on her phone. We unfolded the chairs, wrapped our hands around mismatched mugs of cider, and let the day feel softer around the edges. Mr. Darcy patrolled beneath the buffet table, pausing to sniff Deborah's boots with what I could only describe as quiet judgment. The stories started slow, a few complaints about bills, sore knees, politics, but by the second mug of cider, we were laughing. Not loud, not forced, just that easy, worn-in laughter that comes from people who've lived through enough and still choose to laugh anyway. Marge handed me a little frame wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a quote, printed in her crooked cursive, "You didn't break, you just stopped bending." I ran my fingers along the edge. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me." Later in the afternoon, when the sun made one last reluctant appearance, Sylvia showed up at the gate. Nathan's mom. She wore a long coat and the kind of hesitation that lingers like perfume. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I didn't ask you to come," I replied, "but I opened the gate anyway." She stood next to me while the others chatted and picked at deviled eggs. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I believed Courtney. For too long, I was complicit in her cruelty. I see that now." I looked at her, really looked, and I saw the same weight in her eyes I once carried in mine. "I don't need an apology," I said softly, "but I'll accept the truth." We didn't hug. That would have been too much. But we stood together while Marge sliced the cake. It was a new recipe, lighter, less sweet, topped with orange zest instead of walnuts, and that first bite made me smile, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. Then Deborah handed me a small package, no name, no return address. Inside was a folded sonogram image. There was a sticky note attached. "Her name will be Caroline. She has your nose." I held the image for a moment, looked at that little blur, this shape that would one day cry, crawl, and ask hard questions. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I just set the photo next to the recipe box, still unopened, still waiting for the day someone would understand what real inheritance looks like. Then I passed out more cake, laughed at one of Marge's terrible jokes, and added another log to the fire pit. Because for the first time in a long time, this birthday wasn't about being celebrated by the wrong people. It was about finally showing up for myself. The sun poured into the community garden room like it had shown up early on purpose. It lit up the daffodils in mason jars and made the folding tables look like they were part of something a little more special than usual. I brought in the carrot cake, another new version. No frosting this time, just orange zest mixed into the batter and a light dusting of cinnamon on top. I set it down with the other desserts. No big moment. If anyone noticed it was different, no one said a word. And maybe that was the point. Across the room, Marge called out, "Ellie, you forgot to label your masterpiece." I smiled. "It's still a work in progress." She winked. "Aren't we all?" People wandered around, sipping tea from paper cups with little lemons on the side. Someone put on an oldies playlist, and for a little while, the room felt like the kind of place people came to remember who they really were, not who they were supposed to be. Heather showed up carrying something wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. "You're impossible to shop for," she said, "so I made this instead." Inside was a handmade book. The pages were stitched together with uneven thread. On the cover, it said, "Things We've Learned from You." I flipped through it slowly. Each page had a little note, a memory. Deborah had written, "You taught me that love doesn't mean losing yourself." Marge wrote, "You always bring too much, but somehow it's never the wrong amount." Even the librarian from down the street added a story about how I once helped her fix the book return slot with duct tape and cookies. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Heather touched my hand. "You already said it, just by living." Later, toward the end of the gathering, when the room had settled into a soft, happy hum, Sylvia walked over. Her hands were shaking just a little as she held out a small photo. "She's here," she said. "Caroline, this is just for you. Not from her, not from anyone else." I took the photo. A wrinkly little newborn face, eyes shut tight against the world, and right between her brows, a crease, just like Courtney used to have when she was hungry, or tired, or pretending not to be scared. "Thank you," I said without looking up. After a while, once the room had mostly emptied out, I sat alone at one of the folding tables. I pulled out my private recipe journal and turned to the back. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Caroline. Maybe one day she'll want to bake. No frosting." And the thought didn't hurt. It didn't even sting. It just sat there, honest, whole. As the last guests hugged their goodbyes, I walked over to the light switch by the door. I turned to look back one more time. The flowers, the crumbs, the soft leftover laughter still floating in the air. I turned off the lights myself, not because no one offered to help, but because this moment, this space, it belonged to me. And for once, that was enough. The soil gave way like softened butter. I was kneeling at the edge of the raised bed, with my knees resting on Harold's old flannel shirt. I'd turned it into a garden mat. The daffodil bulbs felt small and brittle in my hand, but I've learned not to judge life by how it begins. Some things bloom because they're stubborn, some just because they've waited long enough. Marge had dropped off a seed catalog last week, slipped it into a brown paper bag with a little note that said, "Pick something wild this year." I still went with heirloom tomatoes and marigolds for the borders. The daffodils were my indulgence, bright and unapologetic. As I planted them, I whispered their names into the dirt, not because I'm superstitious, but because I think the earth deserves gentleness. Caroline, Harold, me. The sun finally pushed through the clouds just as I stood to stretch. My joints reminded me, in their usual way, who I am and how far I've come. Mr. Darcy was lounging on the windowsill, one paw hanging over the edge, tail flicking lazily. He didn't meow or move, just watched me like he always does, like he's trying to figure out whether I'm finally getting it right. I turned back to the carrots, brushing some loose soil into place, and that's when I saw her, Courtney. She was across the street, pushing a stroller, her hair pulled back tight, wearing sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully shown up yet. She didn't look toward the house, didn't stop, and neither did I. No wave, no smile, no performance. I didn't go for the gate, I reached for the watering can. Because roots needed tending, not old drama. Mr. Darcy flicked his ear once, then went right back to napping. I walked to Harold's stone near the back fence. It's small, smooth, and still catches the morning light in that same quiet way he used to enter a room, gently, like he never wanted to take up too much space. I set a little marzipan carrot beside it. A silly thing, maybe, but he would have liked it. "I did good, Harold," I said, my voice low but steady. "I finally did good." There was no answer. But the breeze rustled the daffodils, and Mr. Darcy shifted just enough to let me know. He agreed. Inside, the air smelled like lemon soap and old books. I set the watering can by the door and walked to the kitchen drawer. The recipe box was there, still locked, still quiet, but not forgotten. I opened it, and for the first time in years, I copied down the cake recipe again. This time, slowly, carefully, every loop in my cursive deliberate. No edits, no frosting, just the truth. Because not everything needs to be sweet to be enough. Some things just need to be real. Rain tapped against the kitchen window, steady and indifferent. I wrapped both hands around my chamomile tea, watching the steam curl up like a quiet hymn. The table in front of me was mostly empty. Just my open notebook, a pen, and the recipe I'd rewritten 3 times since February. This version was final. No flour smudges, no hesitations. The measurements sat exactly where they belonged. Humble, precise. But the margins? Those were mine. I'd scribbled things like, zest equals joy. Use less sugar if the company's sweet. Fewer nuts if life's been hard lately. Little notes, a quiet rebellion against perfection, a way to make space for feeling. I paused, then reached for the envelope tucked in the drawer, cream-colored, unsealed, just how I wanted it. On the front I wrote, "To whoever needs this more than money." Inside, the note was simple. This cake held a lot of birthdays, heartbreaks, and second chances. If you're holding this, maybe you're in need of one. Just remember, you're allowed to start again, and not everything needs frosting to be okay. I folded it gently and slid it behind the recipe card, lining up the edges like I was closing a chapter. The recipe box was old, the wood scratched, the hinges soft. Harold gave it to me one Christmas, tied with a crooked bow. He said, "It's not empty, it's just waiting." And I filled it, with decades of meals meant to make people feel safe or loved or just distracted. But today, I only placed one card inside, then I locked it. Outside, the earth was damp and forgiving. I carried that tin-lined box across the yard, past the daffodils nodding in the rain, and I knelt down beside the spot where I once planted grief, and now found green. I buried the box where the soil gave way easiest. No speech, no one watching. A time capsule without a timer, something meant to be found, not handed over. Back inside, I left my boots at the door and returned to the window. Mr. Darcy had already claimed the warmest corner of the couch, curled up like a question mark, without a care in the world. I finished the rest of my tea. It was lukewarm by then, but still calming. I didn't check my phone. I didn't reread what I wrote. I just stood there, quiet and steady, watching the rain streak gently down the glass. Because rain doesn't ruin things. It shows you what can survive the washing. Some people think walking away means giving up, but for me, it meant starting over, with both hands finally free enough to plant something new. Not anger, not revenge, just peace. Family isn't always about blood or obligation. Sometimes it's what grows in the quiet after you stop chasing approval. I've learned that saying no can actually be an act of love, especially when that love is for yourself. Rain doesn't ruin everything. Sometimes it clears away what never belonged in the first place. If this story brought something up for you, a chapter you've closed, a boundary you've learned to hold, I hope you'll share it. There's comfort in knowing we're not the only ones learning how to let go. And if you're ready for another story about quiet strength and a little poetic justice, be sure to check out our next episode. My son said I was too ugly for his wedding, so I let him smile for the camera, then took everything. It's not just about beauty. It's about what people stop seeing when they forget who you really are.